He stood up at a town hall and asked a question, just one, about a missing surveillance tape and a buried military project. They laughed, cut his mic, called him crazy. But what they didn't know was that he wasn't just a veteran. He was the last witness to something no one was supposed to remember. Years of silence, sealed envelopes, and a mayor who decided to ask one more question changed everything. What did the classified file reveal? And why did the Pentagon send a letter that simply said, "Cease inquiry"? This isn't just about respect, it's about the truth we try to bury. And the man who wouldn't let it stay hidden. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The folding chairs had been set up in neat rows, each one squeaking slightly as the townspeople shifted and settled in. A coffee urn hissed in the corner, mostly ignored now that the meeting was well underway. The usual concerns had been raised: disputes, road maintenance, a faulty stoplight near the school. The mayor's assistant scribbled notes dutifully, and Councilmember Taylor checked his watch between comments, his jacket too pressed for the modest community center dot near the back. Seated by himself on the last row was a man no one had called on yet. He wore a denim jacket over a faded green shirt, collar creased, hands folded patiently in his lap, gray hair, close-cropped, no notepad, no phone, just quiet attention and a waiting silence. He hadn't moved in the first hour, hadn't whispered to a neighbor, hadn't even coughed. But now, as the council opened the floor to final questions, he raised his hand. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, just a slow lift, as though the motion had weight to it. His arm hung there for a moment steady, weathered, waiting. Councilmember Taylor sighed. "Yes, sir. In the back, you have the floor." The man rose slowly, unfolding himself with a deliberate calm. He cleared his throat once, nodded in thanks, then spoke. "My name is Walter Granger," he said, voice low but clear. "I served with the United States Army from 1972 to 1991, retired staff sergeant." The words had a practiced cadence to them, a formal introduction, not out of vanity, but routine. "I live on Briar Hollow Road," he continued, sighed. About a mile from where the town placed the new security camera on the maintenance depot, he paused. Some council members nodded, recognizing the area. Others looked confused, but politely attentive. "I filed a request about that footage 3 months ago," Walter said. "The camera that picked up the incident on July 14th, but the footage isn't in the town records anymore." He shifted, his weight slightly, not nervous, but measured. "I asked because I recognized the transport vehicle that appeared on the lot that night. It wasn't local. It had markings I haven't seen since a project I was attached to in 1984. It was called Mariner Echo." There was a beat of silence. A few heads tilted, others blinked in mild confusion. Councilmember Taylor leaned into his microphone. "Mr. Granger, are you suggesting something happened at the depot related to a military operation?" "Yes, sir," Walter replied evenly. "I believe something was moved, and I believe the town's storage system recorded it until the file was deleted." A soft chuckle came from one of the rows near the front. A young man, probably early 30s, shook his head and muttered something to the woman beside him. She smiled, but didn't turn to look. Another chuckle, this time from Councilmember Pratt, who folded her hands and said gently, "Mr. Granger, I'm sure your concerns feel real. But we've had a lot of conspiracy theories lately, and I'm not here with a theory," he said, cutting in, but not sharply. "I'm here with a question." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Held it up, then lowered it. "I filed for a copy of the file metadata. The logs show that the footage existed. Clearance I deflagged and removed it. That clearance doesn't match anyone on town payroll." The room shifted uncomfortably. There was a small murmur of side conversations. One of the local reporters tapped a few words into his phone. Someone laughed again, short, awkward, unsure whether it was allowed. Mayor Helen Dorsey wasn't in attendance that night. Her deputy, filling in, leaned toward the microphone and cleared his throat. "Mr. Granger, I'm afraid we're not in a position to verify your claims here. If you'd like to submit your materials, we'll be happy to pass them along to the appropriate." "Already did," Walter said quietly. "Twice." There was an edge of tiredness in his voice now. Not frustration, just the kind that comes after a door doesn't open. No matter how many times you knocked, someone near the front asked under their breath if he was one of those vets with stories. A man by the window said, Yeah, sure, secret projects. In a town of 9,000 people. Give me a break. Walter didn't respond. He looked at no one. He folded the paper slowly, tucked it back into his jacket, and nodded once. That's all I wanted to ask, he said. Thank you for your time. He turned, stepped down the side aisle with steady strides, and walked out the rear door without a word. The laughter stopped as the door clicked shut. The meeting ended without fanfare. Just the sound of folding chairs, scraping back against tile, and a few hollow goodnights exchanged by people who had nothing left to say. In the hallway, clusters of attendees lingered to talk about potholes and teacher contracts and the weather turning too fast. Nobody mentioned the man who had spoken last, at least. Not at first dot, but then someone said it, not loudly. Just the kind of whisper that walks faster than truth. Did you hear that guy? The army one? A laugh. Yeah, the one with the alien. Truck, or whatever. Another voice chimed in. Said he saw a classified convoy in the middle of town. Come on. By the time Walter had reached the sidewalk, the story had already started to bend. What he had said was one thing. What they were repeating was another, and it didn't take long before the two became indistinguishable. Inside the building, Councilmember Taylor pulled off his glasses and rubbed his forehead. We can't keep letting open forums turn into this kind of thing, he muttered to no one in particular. We should start pre-screening speakers. Councilmember Pratt was still typing on her phone. Someone needs to check on him, she said, not unkindly. I mean, he served, right? Maybe he's struggling. Has he been evaluated? A local journalist leaned against the refreshment table, half a cookie in one hand, scrolling with the other. His name was Ron Vega, and he'd been covering town events for the Stonebrook Herald since graduating college 5 years earlier. He'd written about snowplow routes, school board feuds, and the grand opening of the new dog park. This, however, was something new. He posted a photo of the meeting room to the paper's social account, adding a caption. Tonight's town hall ended with an unexpected detour into Cold War intrigue. You really can't make this stuff up. Within minutes, the post began to spread. Not virally, just enough for people to see, to chuckle, to send it to a friend. Walter didn't see the post that night. He didn't own a smartphone. His daughter had offered to set one up for him, but he'd politely declined, saying he preferred to read the news on paper and write letters when it mattered. Still, the echo of what had happened carried beyond his notice. The next morning, a call came into the city office. A resident on Oak Drive asked if the council was looking into the man who made the threats. The receptionist hesitated, unsure how to respond. What threats, sir? Well, the army guy, the one who said people were hiding stuff in the town records. I mean, that's got to be dangerous talk, right? Other calls followed, one from a woman suggesting the man needed help. Another from a business owner concerned about conspiracies scaring away investment. At the newspaper, Ron Vega drafted a column titled Duty, Dignity, and Delusion. When veterans come home with questions, it never ran. The editor-in-chief, a woman nearing retirement, sent it back with a one-line note. Not your story to tell. Still, the damage was done. The words had left the room, and as they always do, they landed differently in each retelling. By the week's end, Walter's name had become shorthand for a kind of tragic confusion. Not with cruelty necessarily, just with that mixture of pity and distance that polite society uses when it doesn't want to deal with complexity. In the minutes before his microphone was cut, Walter had continued speaking, calmly, clearly, asking for an audit of the towns. External hard drives, referencing the serial number of the depot's camera system, even offering to provide a list of dates when unregistered vehicles had been spotted near the municipal yard. The audio recording from the meeting cut off mid-sentence. No technical issue. The deputy mayor had leaned toward the AV coordinator and made a small gesture thumb across the throat. He's done, the deputy had said. We're not giving him a platform. Outside, Walter stood by the sidewalk for a few minutes, watching the cars pass under the streetlight. His hands were in his jacket pockets. He didn't look upset, just tired. When he finally walked away, his footsteps were slow and deliberate, fading down the block like the end of a song no one remembered starting. The next morning, the municipal building was quiet. Light filtered through the frosted windows, catching dust in the air and the edges of manila folders stacked beside the clerk's elbow. Walter stood at the counter, same coat, same calm posture. Holding a plain white envelope, the woman at the desk looked up, already recognizing him. "Mr. Granger," she said with a tight smile. "Another request." He nodded once. "Just need to file it." She reached for the form without asking. He'd filled it out before Weiss now. This would be the third, the same handwriting, the same box checked, public records request. Under description of requested material, the same line appeared again. Surveillance footage from July 14th, Municipal Depot, North Entrance, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. He handed her the form already. Completed. She clipped it to a yellow cover sheet and added it to the growing stack. "You know," she began gently, not unkindly. The last two were denied. "Internal review says the footage was corrupted. System crash." She said it the way someone might explain to a child why the store was out of their favorite cereal. Walter didn't argue. He simply nodded, removed a folded receipt from his pocket, and asked for a stamped copy. The clerk hesitated. "You understand, we're probably going to get the same answer." "I know," he said. She stamped the document, handed him the duplicate, and waited to see if he had anything else to say. He didn't, just tucked the paper into a brown folder, nodded again, and turned to leave. Outside, he crossed the street to the copy shop, the one next to the diner that still had a jukebox no one used. The bells above the door rang softly as he entered. The woman behind the counter greeted him with a familiar nod. "Same as last time?" she asked. He handed her the documents as form, the time-stamped acknowledgement. And the previous 2 denial letters, and asked for 3 sets. She didn't ask why. She just fed the pages through the machine and stacked them in neat piles. He paid in cash, exact change, waited for the receipt. Then walked out again, the bell chiming behind him like the sound of something opening and closing at once. That afternoon, at home, he sat at the kitchen table. No TV on, no radio, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the rustle of papers as he prepared the envelope. He had a system. 1 copy of the request went to the town clerk's office, another to the state's Office of Public Records, just in case they decided to escalate. The third sealed separately went to a P.O. box in Arlington, Virginia. No name on the envelope, just the address. It was one he'd used before. Years ago, he didn't write a cover letter. He didn't include a plea or an accusation, just the paperwork, the timeline, the denials. He had learned long ago that too many words made a thing easier. To ignore Dot, after sealing each envelope, he walked down to the mailbox near the edge of the cemetery. He mailed them all at once, then stood there for a moment longer than necessary, hands deep in his pockets. Watching a squirrel dig through leaves near the fence, back at the house, the kettle whistled low. He poured himself tea, sat at the window, and watched the breeze move the top branches of the cedar tree in the neighbor's yard. He didn't speak the rest of the day. There had been a time, years earlier, when denial letters like these had made his voice rise, when he would have shown up in person, demanded answers, pressed his finger into a table to emphasize a point. But the years had done their work. They had replaced urgency with something slower. Not resignations, something else, a kind of resolve. With no edge, he knew the difference between someone forgetting and someone hiding, so he waited. And somewhere, 3 envelopes traveled in 3 different directions, each one carrying the same quiet refusal to disappear. Mayor Helen Dorsey kept her mornings quiet. She arrived at her office each day around 7:15, an hour before anyone else, and preferred to read alone with the blinds half drawn and the lights still off. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, dark roast with just a splash of cream, and the low hum of the central heat filled the silence. On her desk was the usual stack of folders, meeting minutes, departmental updates, budget summaries. Most of it she skimmed. Much of it she already knew. She flipped open the manila folder labeled Town Hall Public Forum Minutes and scanned for anything out of the ordinary. Item 12 was a complaint about potholes on Mill Street. Item 15 was a request to extend the community garden space. There was a note about a local scout troop requesting permission to repaint the benches at Library Park. It was standard, procedural, unremarkable. But then, halfway through page 3, she paused. The transcript read, Walter Granger, Public. Comment timestamp, 8:14 p.m. Surveillance footage from July 14th, 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. appears to be missing. The camera installed at the municipal depot logged activity during that window. A vehicle entered the lot without authorization. The footage was there. I saw the record of it. Now it's gone. Someone deleted it. The transport vehicle had markings that matched Project Mariner Echo. She lowered the paper. Her first instinct was confusion, then concern. She knew the name Walter Granger. Not personally, but enough. He had filed a complaint about that depot footage before. Twice, she remembered. The brief summary notes: system error, file unrecoverable, no known threat. It had been marked, resolved. No further action. Still, the phrase Project Mariner Echo was not one she had ever seen in her years as mayor. Not in any council packet, not in any town archive, and certainly not in the regular chatter of local politics. It stood out clinical, unfamiliar, not part of the usual rhythm. She reached for her notepad and wrote down the phrase carefully. Underlining it twice, Helen was not one to chase rumors. She had built her career on patience and composure. She had handled floods, economic downturns, and a school board scandal without raising her voice. She did not react to noise. But something about that phrase and name, with weight, a specific timestamp, the reference to deleted footage, didn't feel like noise. She turned the page, reading further. The transcript noted that Granger's microphone had been cut after a procedural reminder to remain on topic. There was a brief entry, laughter from attendees, no response recorded from council members. She sat back in her chair, her coffee cooling. Beside her, outside, the snow from the previous night still clung to the sidewalk edges, gray and crystalline. She stared at the transcript again, this time not as a piece of town business, but as a puzzle. Why had the microphone been cut? The man had raised a concern about town security footage that fell within public oversight, and yet it had been dismissed. Helen opened her laptop, navigated to the internal city server, and searched the public security logs for the date in question, July 14th. There were entries for most town facilities: the library, the courthouse, the municipal garage. The depot's log, however, was blank for that window. Just a missing entry. No activity, no error report. Just space. She checked the name again. Walter Granger. Former military, if she remembered correctly. He lived out past Briar Hollow, near the edge of town where the old rail line used to run. Quiet, never filed excessive complaints, never raised his voice in public. She folded the transcript and placed it back in the folder. Then she pulled out a separate notepad she used for personal notes, one she didn't keep in the public files. On a clean page, she wrote, "Depot footage. July 14th, missing." Then, W. Granger claims visual ID on vehicle. Underneath she wrote, "Mariner Echo." The words meant little on their own, but something about them stayed with her. She closed the folder. On her desk, the pile of administrative paperwork remained untouched. She reached for her coat instead. If Walter Granger was asking questions, she thought someone in town should start listening, even if they were late to it. The kitchen table was covered in papers. Not scatterjust, arranged in quiet order, as though each one had been placed with exact purpose. On the far corner, the toaster clicked as it cooled. The window above the sink was cracked open slightly, letting in the early evening air and the soft rustle of trees just beyond the porch. Walter sat at the table in his usual chair, sleeves rolled up, a strip of clear tape hanging from his fingers. Across from him, his daughter watched without speaking. Marina had come by to drop off groceries. A loaf of bread, a canister of coffee, a few other things he wouldn't ask for himself but always used if they appeared in the cupboard. He hadn't said much when she came in, just nodded at the bag, took it from her hands, and set it gently on the counter before returning to the table. Now he was taping a torn envelope slowly, carefully lining up the edges like someone reconstructing something fragile. She had seen him do this before, not often, but always in the same way. Quiet, methodical, distant, as though the act itself mattered more than what was inside. "You got another letter?" she asked, her voice low. He didn't answer at first, just finished the line of tape and pressed it flat with the back of his thumb. Then he nodded once, still not looking up. "Was it opened like that when it arrived?" she asked. Another pause. Then no, she sat down, not opposite him this time, but to the side, angled slightly so she could see his hands. There was ink on his fingertips, blue smeared lightly from the letter's inside flap. He hadn't meant to open it roughly, she knew, but sometimes his hands acted faster than his mind gave permission. "You've been up early again," she said. He gave no reply. She wasn't expecting one. Outside, the wind chimes tapped faintly against each other, the sound barely reaching. Through the cracked window, Marina could smell the cedar tree nearby, the same one that had stood outside her bedroom when she was a child. Its branches still leaned toward the roof, like they had always wanted in. "You had the dream last week?" she asked. He nodded. She leaned back slightly, arms folded. Same one. He never did. The dream came in flashes, and she knew better than to ask him to narrate what his own memory refused to stitch together cleanly. The pieces always showed up in gestures instead. The kettle left boiling too long, the envelope torn before the contents were read, the insistence that something was missing from the record knot in some grand paranoid way. But in the quiet conviction of someone who had learned to notice absence as clearly as presence, she reached for the envelope. "Can I look?" He hesitated, then slid it toward her. Inside was the third denial, the same wording, the same bland signature from a different staff member. The phrasing was bureaucratic, carefully designed to say nothing clearly. No responsive, records technical failure. "We regret the inconvenience." She had read enough of these to know they were stalling him, not denying, just slowing. "They're trying to tire you out," she said. "I know," he replied. His voice was even, no bitterness, no anger. Just the weight of someone who'd seen systems move like this before, slow and heavy and quiet, until the person asking the questions simply stopped asking. She folded the letter back into the envelope and slid it across the table. He reached for another piece of tape and mended the top flap as if making it whole again might preserve something else. Marina watched the motion. It wasn't the letter he was fixing. It was the part of himself that couldn't let things be. Lost without effort. That was how he had always been. Even as a child, she remembered him fixing toys she had already forgotten, repairing a broken drawer no one used, sealing the edges of things with a kind of reverence. "You want me to help? You draft something?" she asked. A different kind of request. "I can try wording it another way." He shook his head. "Not yet." She nodded. She didn't press. She stood up, walked to the counter, and put the groceries away in silence. When she left a few minutes later, she paused at the doorway and looked back. He was still at the table, still taping, still holding the silence. The way he always had liked it was something sacred, something necessary, something earned. The light bulb flickered as it warmed, casting long shadows across the unfinished floor. The basement smelled of concrete, rust, and something faintly metallic that always lingered after rain. The stairs creaked under Walter's weight, each step slow and deliberate. He moved without urgency, but not without purpose. He carried no flashlight. He didn't need one. He had walked this path 100 times before, at the base of the stairs. Beneath a low shelf stacked with old paint cans and a half-empty container of road salt was the wooden box. It wasn't large, about the size of a suitcase, but heavier. The surface bore scratches and a faint water stain that spread outward from one corner like a faded map. It had no label, no handle, just a brass lock, the kind that didn't come from a hardware store. Walter knelt, reaching into his pocket for the small key he kept wrapped in cloth. He held it for a moment before inserting it into the lock and turning gently. A soft click echoed into the stillness. The lid groaned as it opened, revealing the contents inside its item nestled in with deliberate care. Each layer separated by folded cloth or manila folders yellowed with age. He took the top folder first. Inside were photographs, black and white mostly, though a few had faded into sepia. Faces stared out from a time most people had forgotten men in uniform, arms around each other, squinting against the sun. The back of one photo read, "Gaza, 85, in a tight slanted script. Another showed a chain-link fence with a warning sign blurred by motion. No faces in that one, just shapes. And shadows beneath the photos were letters. Some typed, others handwritten, some redacted, with entire paragraphs covered by thick black lines. Others were never meant to be official. Notes between men who had served together, passed in silence, and never mailed. He unfolded one carefully, the corners crisped despite the years. "They're moving the array. Says it's a test, but nothing about this feels like a test. Keep your kit packed." He folded it again and returned it to its sleeve. A second envelope contained coordinates, latitude, longitude, elevation, all marked in pencil. Some had additional notes beside them burned out. No entry. Satellite pass 341. He remembered these, not all of them, but enough to know their meaning hadn't faded. He had kept them safe not because he thought someone would come for them, but because they might be needed someday. That was the difference. Next were receipts. Some were innocuous sailline tickets from military transports, long decommissioned, supply forms stamped confidential. But others were stranger. One listed a shipment of non-standard materials, destination blacked out. Another bore the insignia of a defense contractor that no longer existed, or perhaps never had. Then, finally, at the bottom of the box was the envelope. It was heavier than the others, not just in weight, but in presence. Cream-colored, sealed with a strip of adhesive that had turned brittle. On the front, in block letters, "Do not open until declassified." He held it in his hands, turning it slowly. The paper had yellowed at the edges. There was no return address, no date, no signature. But he remembered who had given it to him, Captain Wells. On a quiet night in 1989, they hadn't spoken much, just a nod, a handshake, and a box handed over with that envelope sitting on top. Walter had never asked why. He hadn't needed to for 36 years. He had kept it sealed. He ran his thumb along the edge of the envelope, tracing the line of glue. He didn't open it now. He never had. But tonight he sat with it longer than usual. It wasn't just memory that drew him to it. It was the feeling that the silence he'd guarded might soon be asked to break. The letter didn't threaten. It didn't beg. It waited. He placed it gently back in the box, then folded the cloth over it like a blanket, tucking each corner tight. He locked the lid again, slipped the key into his pocket, and stood upstairs. The house was still, but the air had changed. The truck pulled up slowly, its tires crunching softly over the gravel drive. It didn't announce itself with noise or haste, just rolled in like it had always known the way. Walter didn't move from the porch. He had seen it coming 5 minutes. Earlier, a dark shape cresting the hill, following the curve of the tree line like it had done years ago. He recognized the engine's rhythm before he saw the license plate. The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out looked older than Walter remembered, grayer around the temples. Slower in the shoulders, but there was still a steadiness to him. A deliberate calm that came from too many hours watching perimeter lines and waiting for things not to happen. Walter stood, but he didn't go down the steps. He waited. The man Ray Mercer tilted his head in quiet greeting. No handshake. Number, salute, just a nod. Neither of them said anything. They sat in the porch chairs, the same 2 chairs that had been there since Walter's wife was alive. Paint peeling a little more each year, but the frames still strong. Walter offered nothing. Drink, no welcome. Ray didn't expect it. They simply sat. The boards beneath their feet creaking now and then. When one of them shifted, the wind moved through the trees in steady intervals, like someone breathing just out of sight. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once, then stopped. Birds called in the distance but didn't linger close. Ray reached into his jacket and pulled out a small brown bag. He opened it slowly, took out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and set it on his lap. Still, they said nothing. This was how it had always been with them. Not just since retirement, since the early days, to when words were liabilities and silence was easier to carry across time zones and borders. The kind of bond that didn't require conversation because it had already survived too. Much without it, Ray ate half the sandwich, then wrapped the rest, tucked it back in the bag, and rested his hand over it. He leaned back in the chair, squinting. At the horizon, "They called me in '92, he said. Voice low, Walter didn't reply. They asked if I remembered the depot near Kandahar. I told them I didn't. Ray let the silence stretch again. Walter didn't press. He knew what it meant when someone said they didn't remember. Ray reached into his jacket once more and pulled out a folded napkin. Nothing else, no folder, no envelope, just a napkin, creased and flattened into a small square. He placed it on the arm of Walter's chair, then leaned back again. Do with it what you want, Ray said. Walter looked at it but didn't touch it. There was no logo on the napkin, no writing on the outside, just something soft, folded with care. You hear about Night? Ray asked after a while. Walter nodded. She's circling again. Walter nodded once more. Another long pause. Figured you'd want to know before she shows up, pretending not to know what she's looking for, Ray said. He stood slowly, his knees stiff from the long drive. He didn't stretch, just pulled his jacket straight and looked out at the tree line one last time. "You'll know when to use it," he said. Walter didn't watch him walk away. He just listened to the gravel shift as the truck reversed out of the drive. The engine faded into the distance. No wave, no second glance. When the quiet returned, Walter finally picked up the napkin and unfolded it. Inside, written in careful blue ink, were 4 numbers. 7,934, no label. No explanation, but he understood. He refolded the napkin slowly, pressed it between 2 pages of an old field journal, and slid it into the drawer beside the porch door. Whatever it opened, wherever it led it, had been waiting, just like him. The post went up late in the afternoon. A neatly cropped image of Council Member Taylor sitting at his office desk, sleeves rolled up just enough to suggest casual engagement. Behind him, a bookshelf full of reference binders and small flags framed the shot in soft, neutral lighting. The town's social media coordinator had taken care to blur out any background clutter, giving the image a clean and professional tone. The statement was just 3 paragraphs long. "We want to reaffirm that the town council values every resident's voice. We take all public comments seriously and strive to maintain a respectful, inclusive environment during our community meetings. We regret if any recent exchanges at the October 12th Town Hall gave a different impression." There was no name mentioned, no direct reference to Walter Granger. Just a quiet, calculated sentence dropped into the middle of the text. "We acknowledge the courage it takes for veterans and all citizens to speak out on issues they care deeply about." The post received a few dozen likes and a smattering of polite comments. "Glad to see this. Well said. Appreciate the professionalism. Nothing inflammatory, nothing revealing. A typical gesture to smooth over discomfort and move on." Inside Town Hall, Councilmember Taylor stood by the printer, waiting for his meeting packet to finish collating. He sipped his coffee slowly, scrolling on his phone. When he saw the post, he gave a half nod of approval and tapped it twice to share it to his personal page. "That should quiet the noise," he said. Across the room, his assistant was loading a tray of copies. She didn't respond. Taylor returned to his office, shutting the door with a little more force than necessary. He tossed the packet onto his desk and let out a breath. He was still irritated about the way the last meeting had ended. He didn't like being caught off guard, and the veteran, what was his name, Granger, had put him in that position. With his talk about deleted footage and Black Ops projects, he had disrupted what was supposed to be a routine night. Zoning changes, road repaving, not some Cold War ghost story. Taylor leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "Classified. Files," he muttered under his breath. "Jesus." The door creaked open slightly. His assistant leaned in. "Press asked if you'd be available for a follow-up quote about the apology post." "No," he said quickly. "Tell them the statement stands on its own." She nodded and closed the door again. Taylor stood up and walked over to the window. His office overlooked the west side of Main Street, where the bank and the hardware store sat in quiet opposition to the cafe and library across the road. He watched people walk by, jackets pulled tight against the wind, conversations brief and unmemorable. He didn't think much about the man who had spoken. He remembered the look in his eye, steady, unblinking, like someone who wasn't there to convince anyone but just to say what needed saying. Taylor had seen that look before. It didn't impress him. He chalked it up to stubbornness, not sincerity. He paced the length of his office and opened the mini fridge, pulled out a bottle of water. Still, his thoughts drifted back to the meeting. Not to the veteran's words exactly, but to the way the room had gone still after he left. That brief moment when no one was sure how to recover. The laughter hadn't returned immediately. The space had shifted. Just slightly. Taylor didn't like that shift. He opened his laptop and checked the engagement numbers on the statement post. Nothing too active, no comments calling him out directly. That was good. He clicked through to the original transcript of the meeting, reading over his own interjection. "Sir, are you currently under any treatment?" That's what he had said. He hadn't meant it, cruelly at least, not consciously. It was reflexive. A defense. He closed the file. Then off camera, alone in his office, he rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath. People get old and start seeing shadows, and suddenly we're supposed to salute every word like it's gospel, remained online. But the silence that followed it said more than the words ever did. The office was empty again, just as she preferred it. Mayor Helen Dorsey had returned to her desk late in the evening, long after the building had emptied out and the hallway lights dimmed to their low, energy-saving hum. Her blazer was folded neatly over the back of her chair. The glow of her desk lamp cast a narrow circle of light onto a legal pad filled with her handwriting. At the top of the page was a simple string of characters: Mariner Echo 7934. She had written it twice, once in print, once in cursive, not for emphasis, just to see how it felt. She didn't know what it was: a designation, a call sign, a project. She only knew it had weight. The kind of quiet, unmistakable gravity that doesn't raise its voice to make itself known. She turned the page and opened her laptop, navigating through secure contacts until she found the number. It wasn't a listed office line. It was a personal cell, given years ago during a routine conference on municipal emergency coordination. Helen hadn't used it since, but she had kept the name: Ann Calder, Office of Strategic Affairs, Governor's Office. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the call button. Then, without giving herself another second to overthink, she pressed it. The phone rang twice, then a click. Calder. Helen took a breath. Ann, it's Helen Dorsey. There was a pause, but not of surprise. Just of someone shifting mental gears. Helen, it's been a while. Yeah, sorry to drop in out of the blue. No problem at all. What's going on? Helen turned slightly in her chair, glancing toward the frosted window and the shadows. Stretching beyond it, I'm looking into something small. Maybe nothing. Just a code string that came up in a public meeting. It stuck with me. Calder didn't respond immediately. The silence wasn't disinterest. Helen knew that kind of silence. This one was thinking, "What's the code?" Calder asked. Finally, Helen read it exactly as it appeared in her notes. Mariner Echo and the number 7934. I don't know if they're connected. The context was vague. There was another pause. Longer. Helen leaned forward, pen poised in her hand, though she didn't expect to be given anything she could write down. Calder's voice, when it came back, was quieter. Where'd you hear that? I'd rather not say yet, just checking if it's noise or something more. On the other end, Helen could hear typing. Not furious, not fast, just careful. I can't give you anything official, Calder said. I'm not asking for official, just whether I should stop looking. Calder exhaled, but it wasn't an answer. Then, Mariner Echo hasn't been referenced publicly in over 30 years. It was one of those files with a half-life. You'd need to be digging deep to even come across the name. What was it, Helen? I'm not asking you to breach protocol. No, you're not, Calder said, her tone shifting slightly. But I know you. You're not calling unless it's already close. All can say is this. It was joint, civilian-military oversight, redundancy protocols, asset protection, and it was never supposed to involve public records. Helen scribbled quietly on her pad. Joint never meant to show up in town files. Could it explain why a municipal surveillance file might vanish? She asked. A pause. If it's tied to Mariner Echo, Calder said, you won't find the file. And if you did, it wouldn't mean what you think it does. What about the number? 7934. I won't touch that. That answer told Helen more than anything else. Are you okay? Calder asked, her voice now touched with personal concern. I'm Minar you safe. I am, Helen replied, but I don't know if everyone else is. She heard the tension on the other end deepen. If this is deeper than town politics, you need to be careful, Helen. Some things still have teeth. I know, Helen said softly. Another silence. Then Calder spoke again, her tone almost resigned. If this shows up again, I didn't answer the phone. Helen nodded, though no one could see. Understood. She ended the call, closed the laptop slowly, and sat still in the quiet. In the far corner of the office, the radiator clicked to life, filling the room with low heat. Helen didn't move for a long time. She stared down at the notepad, where the words she'd written now seemed to hum faintly with meaning. She'd made inquiries before, but this wasn't routine. This was something else, and the silence that followed the call wasn't the kind that settled. It was the kind that waited. The archive room wasn't open to the public on Fridays. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the rows of metal cabinets, each drawer labeled in fading marker: building permits, deeds, infrastructure, 1980s, zoning, MISC. There was no climate control. The windows were sealed shut with caulking so old it had turned brittle. Dust rose from the floor in slow swirls with each footstep. Eileen Marsh, assistant clerk for Windham County, didn't mind the quiet. She preferred it, actually. Most of her coworkers had taken the afternoon off for a departmental training in the next town over. Eileen had stayed behind to organize the old zoning requests, a task she had postponed for weeks. Now, with no phones ringing and no interruptions, she opened drawer after drawer, sifting through yellowed folders and misfiled applications, slowly sorting them into chronological order. She didn't expect to find anything unusual. Most of it was routine: permits for sheds that were never built, hand-drawn sketches of property lines with wrong measurements, scribbled notes about fence disputes and tree branches hanging over lot lines. She moved through the paperwork steadily, her latex-gloved hands flipping without urgency. Then she reached a folder with no date on the tab, no index code, just a blank label. Inside was a single zoning application, typed neatly, dated October 1974. The request came from a local logistics company that had since dissolved. The listed address was an industrial parcel on the outskirts of Stonefield, near where the maintenance depot now stood. It asked for approval to construct a temporary outbuilding for secure storage with no further detail. Eileen tilted her head. Something about the wording felt off. She turned to the second page. Attached to the back of the application with a rusted paperclip was a letter. It was on thick paper, printed in dense type. The header bore the faded name of a defense contractor, Kronstadt Applied Systems, and the signature at the bottom. Typed, Reed, Richard N. Haverly, Regional Director. Field Operations. Eileen had never heard of Kronstadt Applied Systems. She'd worked in municipal records for over 2 decades. She knew the companies that came and went: construction firms, utilities, agricultural suppliers, but this one didn't ring any bell. She read the letter twice. It was dry, purposefully nondescriptive. It stated that the zoning request was in alignment with Project Olive as filed under the joint operating directives of the Federal Coordination Committee, FCC, and the State Emergency Infrastructure Unit. Then came the sentence that stopped her. All operational details fall under Section 19.4 of Project Olive classified. For reasons of state continuity, please coordinate without delay, as per the standing agreement. The words Project Olive had been underlined with a black pen, then heavily crossed out, blacked out entirely. Not with a marker, with something thick, layered, deliberate. Not redacted in the traditional sense, but physically obscured after the document had been filed. Eileen sat back in her chair and stared at the page. She'd seen federal documents before. Occasionally, FEMA requests or communications from Homeland Security made their way into local hands during emergencies. But this was different. There was no record of a standing agreement with any federal body. No listing of Kronstadt Applied Systems in the official vendor registry. No indication this document should have ever passed through the zoning office at all. She flipped the page. Nothing else. No attachments. No approval stamp. Just the letter and the zoning form, filed quietly in a folder that had never made it. Into the master index, she checked the signature again. Richard Haverly. She opened a browser on the county terminal and searched the name. The screen loaded slowly. There were only 2 results. Both were from scanned PDFs of government registries from the late 1970s. One listed Haverly as a consultant to non-standard operations. The other didn't mention his title at all, just referenced his presence at a classified subcommittee hearing. Held in D.C. in 1975, Eileen reached for her phone. She wasn't the type to start rumors, but she knew when a document didn't belong. She took a photo of the letter and sent it to Mayor Dorsey with a short message. "You're going to want to see this," found in the zoning files. No record of filing. Mentioned something called Project Olive. Then she slipped the letter into a protective sleeve, refiled the original folder as it was, and locked the drawer behind her. She didn't mention it to anyone else. Not yet. The bedroom was quiet, but not still. Wind moved through the open windows in soft pulses, lifting the edge of the curtain and pushing cool air across the hardwood floor. The kind of air that smelled faintly of iron and wet leaves. Walter lay. On his side, the sheet half tangled around his legs, one arm bent under the pillow. His breath came steady, but his brow twitched now and then, reacting to things only visible behind closed eyes. The clock on the nightstand read 2:37, a dot M. Its red digits glowed faintly in the dark, casting a soft rectangle of light against the glass of a half-full water bottle at the foot of the bed. The dog stirred. Kip was a black Labrador mix, 10 years old, quiet as a shadow. He rarely barked unless it mattered, and he had learned over the years to match Walter's silence without instruction. But tonight, Kip was awake, fully alert, head lifted, ears perked toward the open window. He didn't growl, he didn't move. He just stood and blinking at the tree line beyond the edge of the yard. Walter's eyes opened without a sound. In a panic, not even confusion, just a slow return to awareness, as though his body had registered something before his mind had caught up. He lay still for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no voices, no distant cars, just wind. And Kip, the dog, Hedin shifted his gaze. Walter sat up, the bed creaking faintly under his weight. He rubbed a hand over his face, then moved the curtain aside, peering out into the dark. The trees across the yard stood tall and motionless, despite the wind. That alone caught his attention. The wind was moving. He could feel it in the room, cool and steady. But the trees weren't bending. Not even the smaller ones that usually shuddered at the slightest breeze. He narrowed his eyes. Kip moved now, finally stepping toward the window and sitting beside it, still watching. Walter didn't speak. He just waited, watched, counted the seconds. Something about the air felt too smooth, like it wasn't moving in from the east, but being pulled somewhere else, drawn toward a fixed point beyond the tree line. He stood, pulled on the flannel shirt draped over the bedpost, and walked quietly to the kitchen. The house creaked in places it didn't usually creak, old wood shifting under subtle pressure. He reached for the drawer near the sink and pulled out a small flashlight, then returned to the bedroom. Kip was still by the window, tail down, ears forward. Not afraid, not restless, just alert. Walter clicked the flashlight on, but didn't point it out the window. He aimed it at the wall beside him, letting his eyes adjust. Then he opened the second drawer in the nightstand and removed a small black case. He hadn't needed it in years, but tonight he opened it anyway. Inside was a pair of old field binoculars, military issue, scratched but clear. He stepped to the window, lifted them, and scanned the tree line slowly. Nothing but that didn't mean it. Wasn't there, because what he felt wasn't presence, it was return. Something had shifted. He stood at the window for nearly 10 minutes, Kip silent at his side. When the wind finally stilled, it did so all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. The curtain fell limp, the smell of wet iron faded, and still the trees didn't move. Walter lowered the binoculars and clicked off the flashlight. He closed the window slowly, locking it with care, then walked the perimeter of the house, room by room, checking each door, each latch, each line of sight, back in the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed. Kip climbed up beside him without prompting. Walter looked again at the clock. 3:08. A.M. He didn't lie back down. Instead, he picked up the notepad from the nightstand and wrote one word across the top line: watch. Then he drew a small circle next to it, and in the center of the circle, he wrote return signal. The window stayed closed for the rest of the night. But something had already entered. Not through glass or wood, through memory. It was just past 4 in the afternoon when Walter heard the knock. Not a hard knock, not the kind of impatient pounding he'd come to associate with political canvassers or delivery drivers in a rush. This one was quiet, 3 spaced taps, deliberate, not demanding. He stood from the kitchen table where he'd been nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and crossed to the front door. Kip, already at his side, didn't bark, just stood still, watching. When Walter opened the door, the woman on the porch was alone. Mayor Helen Dorsey wore a plain wool coat and dark slacks. No staffer at her side, no press trailing her. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and in her left hand, she held a slim brown folder tucked beneath her arm. She gave him a small nod, polite, not political double quotes, Mr. Granger. She said he didn't answer immediately. Just tilted his head slightly. Waiting. I'm not here in any official capacity, she added. No cameras, no reporters, just me. I was hoping I could ask you something. Walter glanced past her toward the street. No parked cars except a faded sedan about 30 yards down, half hidden under a pine tree. He opened the screen door without a word and stepped aside. She walked in slowly, her boots leaving faint prints on the entry mat. Kip followed her with his eyes, but didn't move. Kitchen's warm, Walter said simply, leading her in. No need for more. They sat across from each other at the table. She placed the folder down between them, but didn't open it. He noticed her hands not trembling, but tight around the edges. Controlled, I read the transcript from the town hall, she began. Then I read it again. Walter didn't respond. Your question about the missing tape, the surveillance delay, the codename U, said it without hesitation. That's what caught my attention. You weren't bluffing, still. He said nothing. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. I made a call, someone I know at the state level. I didn't mention you by name, but I asked about Mariner Echo. They went quiet, completely this time. Walter's expression changed barely. A flicker of recognition, quickly masked, so. I kept digging, Helen continued. Zoning files, contractor records. I found a letter. It referenced something called Project Olive. She tapped the folder, but still didn't open it. Her eyes stayed on his. I don't know what that means yet, but I think you do. Walter looked down at the table, then at Kip, who now rested. Under his chair, his fingers traced the edge of his coffee cup. Then, without lifting his voice, he asked, Why are you really here, Mayor? She leaned back, exhaled once. Because I believe you, and I think you were silenced for a reason. I don't know what they buried, but I've seen enough now to know it wasn't a mistake. He didn't flinch. He'd waited years to hear someone say that out loud. But when it came, it didn't feel like vindication. It felt like a door unlocking. Stood and walked to a cabinet near the hallway, pulled out a small metal tin with a hinged lid, returned to the table, and placed it between them. Everything in here is legal, he said. No stolen files, no recordings. Just notes, copies, patterns no one else ever bothered to look at. Helen opened the tin carefully. Inside were clippings, articles from the 1970s and 80s, receipt copies, hand-drawn maps, an old Polaroid of a field with 2 black trucks in the distance, a diagram of an underground access tunnel drawn in graphite pencil with military-style annotations. She flipped through each slowly. He watched her face. When she got to the envelope marked "Do not open until declassified," she paused. You haven't opened it? She asked. No, why not? Because I was told not to. By who? He didn't answer. She placed the envelope back inside and closed the tin. Her voice softened. If I push this forward, there are risks. For both of us. I know, Walter said. She stood, lifted the folder from the table, and glanced around the room at the framed photograph on the wall, at the stack of dog-eared notebooks by the door, at the way the curtains had been clipped closed with paper. Clamps. Then we'll go slow, she said, but we won't stop. Walter nodded once. She let herself out. No handshakes, no promises, just the beginning of something that couldn't be undone. The envelope had lived in the same box under the stairs for nearly 30 years. Its edges were soft now, dulled by time and temperature shifts. But the bold block letters on its front were still legible. Do not open until declassified. Had read those words more times than he could count, running his fingers over them during long nights when sleep refused to come. He had never once broken the seal. Now, on a quiet Sunday morning, with the windows shut and the curtains drawn, the envelope sat on his kitchen table. Mayor Dorsey looked at him. Are you sure? Walter nodded, but not quickly. Time was up a long time ago. She picked it up gently, as if even the paper itself might be listening. Then, using a letter opener from the edge of the table, she slid through the seal in one clean stroke. The glue gave without resistance. Inside, there were 5 items: a single typewritten document, a worn photograph, a folded grid-lined map with military markings, a small slip of notepaper with a string of numbers and letters, and a signed letter. On official stationery dated 1984, she laid them out carefully, reading the typewritten document first. Her brow furrowed as she moved through the lines. Then she read it again, slower, and a third time after that, her mouth tightening with each pass. Walter said nothing. After a few minutes, she moved to the second page of the letter. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense, but the signature at the bottom had been partially smudged, unreadable in places. The message was brief. It confirmed Walter's role in what was called Operation Echo Relay, a field test conducted off-grid between 1979 and 1981, involving civilian proximate surveillance technology and unmanned sensor nodes. The project had been formally abandoned in 1982. Quietly, without hearings, without records, the letter stated that personnel involved in Echo Relay are to retain documentation, but refrain from public disclosure until the date of formal projected no earlier than 2020. The year had come and gone. No declassification ever arrived. She looked at the map next. It was hand-marked, showing a small wooded area just outside Stonefield coordinates etched along the edge at a red circle. Highlighted 1 square mile. Zone D4, final relay site. In the margin, someone had written, "Entry sealed, secondary access unknown." The photo was grainy, faded. It showed 3 men standing in front of a vehicle with its insignia blurred. One of them was Walter Decoud's younger. The others were unnamed. The final slip of paper had a code, ALR 57KG1C. Mayor Dorsey sat back. Slowly, the silence between them thickened. This was real, she said, mostly to herself. Echo Relay, Project Olive, the missing tape. It's all tied together. Walter gave a faint nod. I tried to tell them. She looked up. That question you asked at the town hall, about the surveillance blackout, the 12-minute gap. You said there were anomalies in the timestamps. Yes. She lifted the typewritten page again. This says that Echo Relay nodes were designed to interrupt or reroute active surveillance feeds if certain triggers were activated. Walter nodded again. It wasn't just about observing. It was about erasing on command. Helen looked at the table, then back at him. Why you? Why keep you on the outside for so long? I was meant to be the contingency, he said. The one they didn't include in the cleanup. But they underestimated memory. She traced her fingers over the photograph. This map, this zone, is it still there? Walter tapped the table once, if they didn't level it. But I haven't gone back. Helen stared at him, then leaned in slightly. Her voice dropped. Walter, she said, do you think someone's still monitoring it? He didn't blink. I don't think they ever stopped. She folded the documents back into the envelope, now unsealed and quiet on the table. Then, after a long pause, she asked the question again, the one he had asked at the town hall. The one that was never answered. What really happened the night the feed went dark? This time he didn't have to wait for permission. He just began to speak. The coordinates were written in faded black ink, offset on the corner of the map, easy to miss unless you were looking for them. Helen had to squint to make out the second set, tucked between 2 hand-drawn contour lines, 41.3620. 73.8947, she entered them into her phone. Watched the blue pin drop onto an unlabeled patch of green, just beyond the boundary of the old Stonefield train yard. Walter didn't need a GPS. He knew the place by memory. The train yard had once been a key stop for freight lines during the Cold War years, a through point that connected military logistics with coastal depots. It had long since fallen into disuse. The outer fences were rusted, and most of the maintenance buildings had collapsed into the soil. Few people went out there now, to overgrown, to forgotten by the time they reached the edge of the woods. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the gravel access road. Walter drove an old truck, boxy and quiet, with a tarp in the back and a faded military jacket folded over the passenger seat. Helen rode beside him, the envelope in her lap. They parked just beyond a chained gate. No signs, no warnings. Just silence and tangled brush pushing up through the cracks in the pavement. Walter stepped out first, scanning the tree line like it was muscle memory. It'll be about 300 yards in, he said, past the water tower. Helen followed him over a small embankment, the grass high and brittle underfoot. The path hadn't been walked in years, but the ground still bore subtle signs of having once been cleared. A flattened groove, a faint depression where tracks might have run long ago. They moved with care, Kip trotting ahead of them, occasionally Pausing to sniff the wind, they passed the remnants of a fence-bent rebar posts, fragments of chain link sagging into the earth. Then the tower came into view. It was skeletal now, covered in rust, a relic against the green dot. Walter stopped. Here, the clearing looked like any other patch of forgotten woodland, but to him, it was different. He crouched, running his fingers through the soil at the base of a half-rotted tree. After a few seconds, he found a ton-old survey stake, snapped off at the top but still sunk deep into the dirt. Beside it, a triangular cement plate, no bigger than a dinner tray, nearly buried by moss and leaves. Helen knelt beside him. "Is that original?" Walter nodded. "They used these to mark access points. Beneath here is a hatch." She looked around. "Any chance it's been removed?" "If it had been," he said, "we'd see the signs. New soil, disturbed roots. It hasn't been touched." They brushed the debris away slowly. The plate had a number etched into it, D4-26A. Helen ran her fingers over the grooves. It matched the map exactly. Kip stood motionless nearby, ears alert. The woods were silent. No birds, no wind, just the low hum of tension gathering between the trees. Walter pulled a folding tool from his pocket and wedged it under the edge of the concrete. It didn't budge at first, then gave with a dry, cracking sound. Beneath it, a steel ring embedded in what looked like a rusted hatch door, its hinges eaten by decades of rot, but still intact. They didn't open it. Not yet. Helen stood, brushing, her hands off on her coat. "If we go down there," she said, "we'll be crossing a line." Walter looked up at her. "I crossed it the day I asked the question out loud." She nodded, eyes still on the hatch. "So did I." They covered it back up, gently, deliberately. The moss and leaves placed exactly as they'd found them. For now, it would stay sealed. But both of them knew what lay beneath wasn't just machinery or records. It was proof, the kind you couldn't dismiss at a microphone, the kind no apology could erase. Something had been buried under. STONEFIELD, and the ground was no longer keeping its secrets quietly. The municipal server wasn't supposed to have anything classified. It wasn't even supposed to have anything older than 2010. After the system migration that had moved all government records to state-managed cloud storage, but just after 9 p.m., deep in the back corner of the IT department, a junior staffer named Lila uncovered something strange. She had been combing through old backups from a corrupted hard drive, the kind of routine maintenance that usually turned up budget spreadsheets, meeting transcripts, or outdated building permits. But in a directory labeled Emergency Protocols, she found a subfolder simply marked Fire Drill. Inside it were several standard PDF evacuation maps, staff contact trees, first aid training logs, but the last file stood out. It was labeled in all caps, 38_report_final_OLV_A12.pdf. That alone wouldn't have raised eyebrows. What did was the metadata, created in 2002, last accessed in 2005, and tagged under a user profile that no longer existed in the city's employment records. Leela opened it, expecting perhaps a misfiled fire inspection. What she saw instead made her stop breathing. The first page had a clearance stamp, not municipal, federal. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense, faded and grainy but unmistakable. Below it, prepared by LCR Tier 4 Analyst Group, then a single line, subject, Satellite Observation Analysis, Pre-Event Data Sweep, Stonefield Grid 7, CTHE second page, was redacted heavily. Whole paragraphs blacked out, but enough remained to make its contents clear. It referenced a scheduled test of sensor activity tied to a site previously associated with Echo Relay Command, Node D4. The same node Walter had marked, the same zone on the map. The document included timestamps from satellite footage taken over Stonefield for days prior to the incident. Walter had described during the town hall. Lila printed 3 pages before the system locked her out an hour. Later, Helen Dorsey sat alone in her office. The folder spread open in front of her, reading the printed sections under the amber glow of her desk lamp. The room was quiet, except for the soft buzz of the overhead light and the occasional creak of old wood settling in the beams above her. She flipped through the pages slowly, trying to understand what she was holding. Page 12 outlined anomalous energy signatures recorded on May 8th at 3:14 hours. Page 13 included a still frame taken from satellite telemetry, grainy, high altitude, but clearly showing a heat bloom in the forested area behind the old train yard, the same location as the coordinates. The same time window Walter had mentioned in his question, page 15 included something else, a reference to the local feed outage. Surveillance blackout consistent with auto trigger from node D for failsafe. It read, recommend retrieval protocols initiated within 72-hour window to prevent civilian triangulation. Helen dropped her hand from her forehead and sat back in her chair. Her stomach had gone cold. This was confirmation. Walter hadn't been guessing. He hadn't been mistaken or delusional or misremembering a decades-old haze. He had known exactly what to ask because he had lived through it. She turned to the last printed page. It listed 3 agencies as recipients of the original report: Department of Defense, Strategic Tech Liaison, Northern Command, and Asset Liaison, External Civilian Oversight, Conditional. That last phrase caught her attention. Conditional, it meant someone had once been cleared to know, but only if the right questions were asked. And Walter had asked, no one had listened. She placed the pages back into the folder, locked it in her drawer, and turned off her lamp. Outside her window, the town was dark and still. Porch lights, quiet streets, the illusion of peace, but somewhere beneath that calm, the past had begun to surface. Not in rumors, not in memories, in documentation. Evidence that should not have existed, let alone been found by accident, and someone somewhere was going to realize it had been opened. The town records building had always been the kind of place people forgot existed, until they needed a birth certificate or a permit copy. It sat behind the newer municipal complex 2 stories of aging brick with faded security glass and floors that echoed too loudly. Most of the staff worked on the first floor. The second had been unofficially abandoned years ago after budget cuts and mold complaints. No one ever really went up there unless something broke or leaked. That morning, Mayor Helen Dorsey had a key and a purpose. She didn't bring staff. She didn't call ahead. She just walked past the front desk with a leather folder tucked under one arm and a worn keyring from the city archives clipped to her coat pocket. She took the old elevator up one of those slow, groaning lifts that rattled as it moved and stepped out into a hallway dimly lit by fluorescent tubes that flickered at odd intervals. The second floor smelled like cardboard and dust. Rows of old file cabinets lined the walls, some missing drawers, some stuffed with yellowed paper curling at the edges. A sign taped to a door at the far end read, "Do not store beyond this point load limit reached." Helen ignored it. She passed old desks and furniture stacked like forgotten furniture in a storage unit. Just beyond the last cabinet was a wall panel that didn't match. The plaster was cracked, paint chipped, and a faint outline of something rectangular was barely visible. It looked like a door, once painted over and long since forgotten. Beside it sat a filing cabinet with 2 drawers sealed shut with heavy gray tape, no label. She pulled it aside. Behind it, a narrow door with a rusted push handle and a faded placard that had once read Archive Annex Confidential. She used one of the older brass keys from her ring. The lock resisted, then clicked. The door creaked open. Inside was a small room with no windows and one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Metal shelves lined the walls, most of them filled with sealed banker's boxes, uniform and unmarked except for a few, which had codes stenciled in black ink. She scanned the rows slowly, her fingers brushing the dust-covered spines of faded folders and cardboard flaps. Then she saw it, tucked on the middle shelf in the far corner. A box labeled OLV-83. No barcode, no municipal stamp, just that. Helen reached for it. The box was heavier than it looked. She carried it to the center of the room and set it on a folding table covered in an old plastic sheet. The tape was dry and brittle. It broke with a soft crackle as she peeled it back. Inside were carefully organized folders, each one marked with an internal file number, most beginning with the same prefix, OLV. She opened the first folder. It contained memos typed in Courier font dated from 1983. One memo referenced civilian trial exposure thresholds and monitoring protocols for sub-project Echo Relay. Another detailed an incident involving a technician reporting irregular pulse readings at node D4. But the third folder stopped her. It contained a map, almost identical to the one in Walter's envelope. But this one had handwritten notes. A red line traced a path through the woods to the hatch. Beside it, in neat cursive handwriting, someone had written, "If compromised, seal with failover protocol. Civilian awareness equals containment breach." There was also a photograph. Not grainy like Walter's, this one was sharp. Aerial, it showed. A bright flash-caught mid-bloom from above the trees. A time stamp at the bottom matched the satellite still from the municipal server file. May 8th, 3:14. Hours. This was the same event. Different angle. Higher clearance. At the bottom of the box. Beneath the folders, she found a black plastic cassette tape sealed in a padded envelope. No label, no markings. Just a typed note folded and tucked inside. Do not play unless instructed. By command liaison. Contents include original Echo Relay intercept. She didn't touch it. She closed the box, slid it back onto the shelf, replacing it exactly where she'd found it and backed out of the room. Locking the door behind her, as she descended the creaking stairwell, Helen knew something with absolute clarity. Walter hadn't uncovered a loose thread. He had stepped directly into a sealed room of things, meant to remain hidden forever, and now the door had been opened. The recorder was small, heavy for its size, and made of dark brushed steel rather than plastic. A relic from the mid-1980s, older than digital memory, older than Walter's discharge papers, it sat in the corner of the box like it had always belonged there, nested in gray foam with cutouts precisely shaped for its form. There was no tape inside, no batteries, no label, just a note folded once and tucked neatly beneath it, written in blue pen on yellowed stationery. This one doesn't go to court. Walter held it in his hands for a long time before speaking. He sat at the dining room table. The rest of the contents of the box spread out around him. Apps, photos, faded memos, and a sealed envelope still unopened. Kip lay under the table, ears alert but calm, sensing the shift in atmosphere without needing to understand the words. The recorder felt familiar. Not in a personal sense, he'd never held this exact model before, but in the kind of way that said, someone designed this not for convenience, but for containment. It was meant to be used once, perhaps in secret, then destroyed or buried. Something to be listened to and then forgotten. Helen sat across from him. The mayor's folder now expanded with half a dozen copied documents from the archive room. She had placed the note beside her coffee cup, rereading the 7 words over and over. This one doesn't go to court. She looked up. What do you think it means? Walter didn't answer right away. He turned the recorder over in his hand, inspecting the screws, the worn serial number etched into the underside. It means it wasn't meant for testimony, he said finally. This wasn't evidence. It was insurance. He pointed to the empty battery slot. It's not meant to record. It's meant to remind someone what they already know. Helen leaned back slightly, so it was made for someone specific. He nodded. Commanders, liaison officers. Sometimes field agents were given one in case a situation turned. Helen picked up the recorder carefully. It had a single red button on the front. No label, no menu, no display, just play. No one makes these anymore, Walter said quietly. Not legally. Do you think it ever had? A tape, she asked. He didn't respond. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a box of spare batteries. He slid 2 into place. Nothing happened, no light, no motor click, no buzz, just silence. Helen reached for the sealed envelope again, the one marked with the red wax seal they hadn't broken yet. It had been in the box from the beginning, resting underneath the envelope with the coordinates. This one didn't say "do not open," it said only "after contact, Tier C." She glanced at Walter. He gave her a slow nod. She broke the seal. Inside was a single Polaroid photo and a typed strip of paper. The photo showed 3 men standing in front of a concrete hatchet's door ajar. One of the men was unmistakably younger Walter, in uniform. The other 2 were unknown. No names, no insignia. The typed strip read, "Command intercept confirmed. Echo relay held until debrief the 11th of June 1983. Recorder issued post-event, Tier C assigned." Walter's hand moved instinctively to the recorder. Helen looked at him. "Did they ever tell you what was on it?" "No," he said. "Then why would they give it to you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the red button. Nothing. Then, softly, so softly, Helen thought it might be interference at first. Click, then static, then a voice. Mail.com/Midwestern accent. One sentence. Spoken clearly, "You were right not to speak." The recorder clicked off on its own. Helen stared at the machine. "That's it," Walter nodded. "That's all they needed," he said. A warning, or maybe a promise. They both sat in silence for a long time after that. The recorder sat quietly between them, no longer just a machine. Now a line, one that couldn't be The office was dark, except for the pool of light cast by the small desk lamp, the warm amber glow softening the hard edges of the room. Mayor Helen Dorsey sat with her elbows resting on a stack of folders, some city-issued, others clearly not. The recorder sat unplugged and untouched next to her notes. The Polaroid was tucked beneath a legal pad. Her hand hovered over her cell phone longer than she expected. Her fingers shook just slightly. She dialed the number from memory, not her. Contacts, it was faster that way. It rang twice before her husband answered. "Hey babe," he said, casual, his voice light and unsuspecting. Still at work, she didn't speak right away. "Helen." "Yes," she said. "I'm here. You okay?" "You sound," he paused. "Is something wrong with the vote?" No, it's not about that." She adjusted the angle of the desk lamp. I need you to do something, of course. Don't come by the building tonight." A silence followed. Then, more cautious, "I wasn't planning to. Even if you were thinking about it, just don't." "Helen, what's going on?" She let out a slow breath and closed the folder in front of her. The files inside made the air feel heavier. She stared at the grainy satellite image again before sliding it into the bottom drawer. "I just need a quiet night here," she said. "I need to finish something, and I don't want you worrying if I'm late." He hesitated. "Is this about that guy from the town hall, the veteran?" She blinked. "Why do you say that? I've seen your face when you come back from council meetings. This wasn't that look. This was something else. You haven't been sleeping right since that night." She pressed her palm to her forehead. "I'm fine. You sure?" There. It was a beat before she answered. No, it wasn't a confession. It wasn't even fear, really. It was something else. A realization that the simple machinery of her office legislation, zoning ordinances, constituent calls was now intersecting with something far outside its reach. This wasn't a matter of local politics anymore. "I found something," she said quietly. "I'm not even supposed to know it exists, but I do now, and it's not something I can unknow." He couldn't speak. She could hear him shift on the other end, probably moving from the kitchen to the living room, turning off a burner, setting something down. "I don't need you to solve it," she continued. "I just need you not to be near it tonight, not until I understand what I'm holding." More silence. Then he said, "Do I need to be worried about you?" Helen looked at the recorder again. Her eyes fell to the note. "This one doesn't go to court." "I don't know yet," she said. He was quiet for a moment longer. "Okay? Just call me before you come home." "I will." "And Helen, yeah, I love you." She nodded. To herself, "I love you too." She ended the call. Let the silence return. Outside her office window, the town was quiet. Street lights buzzed. A few cars rolled past on the main road. The Civic Center parking lot had long emptied out. The custodial staff had gone home. It was just her, the locked drawer, and the folder she hadn't dared copy. She turned off her phone and placed it face down. Then she reached for the sealed cassette from the archive room, the one she hadn't opened yet. No label, no instructions, only its presence and the question it represented. Not for the public, not for the public, not for court, and not meant to be found. She turned it over in her hand, then set it aside without opening it. Not yet. The technician was only reviewing the tapes because someone had filed a request about missing water bills. That's how it always started, never with anything big. A small administrative task. A form with a note in the margin, double-check overnight maintenance logs. It read, scribbled in red. So, around 10:15 a.m., Greg Lansing sat at his workstation in the back of the IT room, drinking lukewarm coffee and fast-forwarding through silent footage from the town records building. The camera feeds were grainy, fixed in place, low frame, rate, not designed to catch much beyond shadows. Moving through fluorescent corridors, the archive annex was one of 4 listed camera zones. It hadn't recorded activity in months at least, not any activity the system flagged. Mostly, it just looped empty halls. But at 4:12 a.m., the feed blinked. It was a half-second skip noticeable, only because the timestamp in the bottom right corner jumped forward. 4 hours, 12 minutes, and 3 seconds to 4 hours, 12 minutes, and 41 seconds. The camera came back on without fanfare. No warning, no static, no error message, just a moment erased. Greg rewound the feed, slowed it down, watched the second blink forward again. He leaned in before the glitch. The footage showed what it always did: a dim hallway lined with steel filing cabinets. A stack of cardboard boxes beside the door marked Annex. One of the boxes, clearly marked OV-83, sat slightly, turned on the top shelf, facing the camera. Dust particles floated lazily in the camera's infrared range. Then the blank dot, then it was gone. No sign of struggle, no movement. The box didn't fall, it didn't shift, it simply ceased to be. Greg tapped his pen against his lip. He wasn't in the habit of flagging minor video bugs, but this wasn't buffering or standard dropout. The system had no reason to skip. There had been no outage. He checked the server logs, nothing unusual. No reboot, no maintenance ticket. But that one feed showed the gap, and only for that camera. All other angles were intact. He pulled up the side hall, feed closer to the stairwell. Nothing, just flickering lights and stillness. He toggled back to the annex view and froze the image from 4 hours, 12 minutes, and 2 seconds. Then he switched to 4 hours, 12 minutes, and 41 seconds. He pulled both frames into a side-by-side view and stared. The box was the only difference. No janitor, no police, no movement from inside the room. The feed was silent and deadpan. Greg clicked Export Segment. He saved the video, encrypted it, and placed it into a folder marked Glitch Archive. He thought briefly about emailing it to the head of public records, but something about the missing box made his skin itch. He stared at the name again. OLV-83. He had no idea what it meant. Out of curiosity, he opened the town's inventory spreadsheet, a document few people knew existed. It tracked storage contents across municipal buildings, rudimentary list meant for insurance, mostly. He searched for the code. One result appeared, OLV-83, off-site authorization pending status. Retired, no location listed, no contents recorded. He highlighted the row and started typing a note into the comments box. Footage anomaly detected. Item no longer present as of 4:12 a.m. He stopped halfway. Something didn't sit right. The file itself was locked. The moment he typed the word anomaly, his cursor froze. The spreadsheet closed without warning. He blinked and tried reopening it. But the file was gone from his recent list. Greg sat back slowly. He didn't try again. Instead, he opened a blank notepad window, wrote down the date and time manually, then slipped his handwritten note into the drawer under his desk. He turned off the annex. Camera feed. The screen faded to black. Some boxers were meant to disappear. Some footage wasn't meant to blink. The chairs were mismatched plastic folding, and one with a cracked leg held steady by a folded church bulletin. The basement of St. Agnes hadn't been renovated since the late 80s, and the fluorescents buzzed faintly overhead, casting a dull, wavering light across the tiled floor. There were 3 of them in the room. No phones, no notebooks, no recordings. The door was locked from the inside, and a small sign on the knob read, "Storage, do not disturb." Walter sat with his hands folded in his lap. He hadn't worn his cap today. Across from him, Colonel Ray Halvorsen, retired, leaned slightly back in his chair, arms crossed. His uniform was long packed away, but he still carried the posture, shoulders square, gaze level, every movement slow and deliberate. To Walter's right sat Marianne Cross, a local historian from the university, quiet but observant. Her eyes flicked between the 2 men as if mapping their words against decades of unverified notes. Walter spoke first. "Do you remember the staging site? Before the 3rd phase?" Ray nodded. Woods northeast of the rail yard, night drills. 3 trucks, 1 unmarked. Weather was dry, mud on the east fence line from the prior week's rain. Marianne didn't speak. She simply blinked, committing the detail to memory without pen. Or paper, Walter continued. What do you remember hearing, just before it happened? Ray didn't answer immediately. His mouth worked at the edge of a thought, then closed again. There was a sound, he said at last. Low frequency, like metal under tension, like steel groaning, but coming from the ground up. Marianne whispered, You heard it too. Ray glanced at her. You did? She nodded. I wasn't there, but one of the janitors who used to clean the school near the fence line said he heard it once. It shook the hallway windows. The school board dismissed it as pipe pressure. Ray looked back at Walter. No one wrote it down. They weren't supposed to. Project Olive, Walter nodded. It was never supposed to be local. That was the problem. We weren't supposed to stage here, but the schedule changed after the blackout on the coast. They needed proximity to the relay lines. Marianne leaned forward slightly. The files say it was canceled. They always say that, Ray said. You know what it means when a program goes black? It means it doesn't exist until they need it again. No one said anything for a long moment. The air felt still, like the walls had thickened. Walter finally reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper creased, worn, and yellowed at the edges. He unfolded it and placed it in the center of the table. It was a memo, dated 1983, stamped for briefing use only. Ray glanced at it, then at Walter. Where did you get that? I've had it since the day we left the staging zone. It was slid into my pocket. No initials, no orders. Marianne looked at the line at the bottom. Her lips moved as she read it. Echo relay compromised. Contingency, Cethida, engaged. Silence protocol, confirmed. Ray exhaled slowly through his nose. That confirms it. Marianne looked between them. Confirms what? Walter didn't answer. Ray did, that they knew. Before it happened, and they let it proceed. The room went quiet again. There was no recording device, no transcription, but all three of them would remember every word. Marianne finally broke the silence. What do we do with this? Walter leaned back. We don't publish, we don't leak, we wait. Because when the file surfaces and it will, there needs to be more than just one voice saying it's real. Ray nodded. Marianne said nothing. Outside, the church bell struck noon. Inside the basement, stayed silent. The attic hadn't been opened in years. The old key stuck in the lock, and the narrow pull-down ladder creaked as Helen eased her weight onto each step. The light bulb at the top of the hatch flickered twice before settling into a dim, amber hum, casting long shadows across the cedar-lined space. Dust curled upward as she stepped onto the boards, shoes sinking slightly into the layered softness of old insulation and forgotten linens. The air smelled like dried wood and something else, aged paper, maybe, or something more chemical. She hadn't been in this attic since the year her mother passed. The house still belonged to the family, though it sat mostly empty now, just seasonal maintenance and memory. Helen's father had died long before her mayoral career began, a man of routines and silences. He worked for the Department of Energy Oak Ridge Division, but she never really understood what that meant. He left early, came home late, and never spoke much during dinner. Her mother used to call him a vault with shoes. Helen stepped around the stacks of unopened boxes, brushing aside a dangling strand of insulation tape. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, only that something had been nagging at her since the meeting in the church basement. Something Ray had said, something Walter hadn't, a detail that didn't make sense until it did. She crouched beside a low cedar chest, the one with the brass latch. The hinges groaned as she lifted the lid. Inside, neatly folded army blankets, a box of cufflinks, a Ziploc bag filled with old ID badges and lanyards. One badge read DOE, Level 5 ACCESS, temporary. She pulled it out and ran her thumb along the faded laminate. Beneath the badges was a manila envelope, thin yellowed at the corners. It had no writing on the front, just a single strip of red tape across the seal. She peeled it back slowly, careful not to tear the flap, and drew out a thickly creased sheet of paper. She unfolded it once, then again. It was a map, drawn by hand, but overlaid on an official due grid. The bottom corner bore a faint stamp, Field Projection, revised 1979. She recognized the landscape instantly. Quadrant of the county, just past the old rail yard, stretching toward the Woodland Reserve. Marked in red ink were 3 circles. One of them matched the coordinates in the envelope from Walter's basement. Another intersected with the edge of what was now the municipal reservoir built in the early 1990s. The third was off-grid entirely, marked only with a question mark and a dotted line that ran northeast. Helen studied the lines. Each circle had a handwritten annotation next to it. The first, relay a conf, 279ths. The second, cover complete, structure submerged. The third, no access granted. Unknown yield, Mark 4, revisit. Her stomach tightened. She flipped the map over. In her father's handwriting, faint but familiar, was a short list. Night drills, discontinued witnesses, relocated, no civilian notification. Awaiting green code clearance, she stared at the words, trying to make them make sense. It wasn't a report. It wasn't even formatted like a briefing. It looked like a personal checklist. Notes for someone who needed to remember what not to say out loud. She folded the map back along its original lines, placed it in the envelope, and held it against her chest for a moment before lowering it into her bag, before she climbed back down the attic ladder. She took one more look around. In the far corner, behind a stack of empty suitcases, was a padlocked crate. She didn't try to open it, not yet. The map was enough for now. As she descended, she closed the attic door behind her and slid the latch shut. Her father had never spoken about his work, but somehow, even in silence, he'd left her a direction. The letter arrived folded into a sealed manila envelope, standard municipal delivery. No return address. It was placed into the mayor's incoming tray with the rest of the day's internal filings. No one questioned it. It looked official enough. Mayor Helen Dorsey opened it last, mostly out of habit. By then, her coffee had gone cold and the office lights had dimmed to their automatic after-hours setting. She expected a zoning request or a maintenance backlog, but when she unfolded the paper, she stopped reading after the first sentence. Subject: Request for psychological evaluation of Mr. Walter Cray, filed under Municipal Code 14.3b, concerning fitness to participate in public meetings. There was no signature, no agency header, just a clipped paragraph of legal phrasing. Citing municipal rights to request psychiatric review when a civilian displays a consistent pattern of delusional or conspiratorial claims with no substantiated evidence, Helen sat very still. She knew what this was. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about protocol. It was about delay. It had been 3 days since the town hall transcript had made its quiet rounds through unofficial channels, since the veteran's question had been flagged by someone higher up, since she had opened the sealed envelope in his basement and seen the classified code, since the security feed had blinked dot. Now this dot, Helen placed the letter back into its envelope, then picked up her phone and called the council clerk. Can you tell me who scheduled item 9B on next week's council agenda? There was a pause on the line. Item 9B. That's the citizen comment hearing, right? We didn't receive any filings for that. Yes, I know, Helen said, but Walter Cray was scheduled to speak. He confirmed 2 weeks ago. Another pause. Oh, yes, his name was removed from the list. Earlier today, there was a hold placed on it, something to do with a pending motion. Helen kept her voice steady. By whom? Let me check. A series of muffled keyboard clicks, then, it's not showing. The record of the motion is here, but the origin is blank. That shouldn't be possible. Print it and bring it to me, right away. Helen hung up down the road. At his modest, single-story home with the chipped blue mailbox, Walter already knew. He had received a letter of his own. This one was smaller. White envelope, no logo, typed, no signature. The wording was nearly identical to the mayor's version, though his copy carried an additional line at the bottom, pending outcome of psychological review. Public speaking privileges are suspended. Under Code 4.1a, he didn't crumple it, didn't tear it, just placed it neatly beside the window and stared out at the pine trees beyond his fence. His daughter, Ella, stood in the doorway behind him. Are they trying to stop you? Walter didn't answer right away. His hand moved slowly across the armrest. Not stop. If they wanted to stop, they'd have done it years ago. She stepped beside him. Do you want me to call the paper? No, but this is... No, he repeated. No noise. That's what they want. Ella looked at the envelope again, then at her father. What happens now? Walter reached into the drawer beside his chair and pulled out a small folder. Inside were photocopies of everything. The map, The memo, the missing footage, even a photograph of the original OLV-83 box. Dated and labeled, he handed it to her. Now we prepare for them to say, "I imagined it all." Later that evening, the mayor received the printed version of the motion. As she flipped through the pages, one word stood out embedded in the margins of the filing metadata. Redacted. She picked up her pen and drew a slow line under it. There were no initials, no stumps, no proof of authorship. But the intent was clear. Not to discredit him, just to silence him long enough for the rest to be forgotten. The auditorium was quieter than usual, not silent, just subdued. The usual pre-meeting chatter was missing. No clinking coffee cups, no shuffling papers, no laughter from the back row. Just a low hum of anticipation and the occasional cough. Echoing off the high ceiling of the town hall, Mayor Helen Dorsey stood behind the old wood podium, both hands resting lightly on the edge. She wore a dark blazer, no pin, no jewelry, hair tied back. Her expression was unreadable, not tense, not angry, just focused. To her left sat the council members. Most avoided eye contact. A few scanned their phones. Council member Taylor leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, jaw set, like he already knew what was coming and didn't believe it mattered. In the second row, a few reporters had taken seats, their notepads open, pens poised, local papers mostly. One small television camera stood in the back public access channel. Nothing national, not yet. Walter Cray wasn't in the audience, but his daughter was. Helen tapped the mic once. The soft feedback crackled, then steadied. She looked out at the small sea of faces: neighbors, clerks, veterans, business owners, janitors, retirees. "This won't take long," she said. No one interrupted. She took a folded paper from the folder in front of her, a single page, cream-colored, redacted in several sections, but still readable. "This document is part of a declassified summary filed under the 1994 Freedom of Information Act addendum," she began. "Its contents were previously sealed under provisional national security measures. As of last week, a portion of it became available for review by municipal leaders due to its geographical relevance to our town." She paused, letting the language settle in. The audience was still, not tense, just waiting. It references a military experiment conducted on March 4, 1983. The project name was Olive. The location was near the northern tree line, adjacent to the train yard perimeter. The project involved temporary equipment installation, acoustic frequency testing, and thermal mapping over a 7-day period. Civilians were not notified. Records were sealed. No follow-up investigation was initiated. A murmur ran through the room short. "Unsure," Helen continued. "The summary confirms a containment breach occurred at 3:42 a.m. on the 4th day. The nature of the breach is still redacted, but what is not redacted is this sentence. Operation proceeded despite unverified environmental anomalies and field agent distress signals. Subject for 1C initiated post-event silence protocol on local civilian operatives." She looked up from the paper. Walter Cray was subject for 1C. The room shifted, chairs creaked. A reporter's pen slipped from their hand and rolled beneath a chair. No one moved to pick it up. Helen unfolded another paper, but did not read from it. She spoke now without notes. "For the past month, a citizen of this town has attempted peacefully, respectfully to ask a question. One question about an event he was told to forget. An event our own records now acknowledge happened, but were not meant to see the light of day." She looked at the council members now. "Instead of listening, we let him be mocked. We let a motion be filed to question his sanity. And we almost let it work." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I am not here to validate conspiracy theories. I am here to say this. Sometimes silence is not peace. Sometimes forgetting is not healing. And sometimes the person you call confused is the one carrying the truth because no one else would." A long pause. Then she folded the summary and placed it back in the folder. From the second row, Walter's daughter looked down at her lap. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from relief. The mayor stepped away from the podium. No applause followed, just stillness, heavy, like the room itself had remembered something it had been trying to forget. The air in the town hall had changed. No one spoke. Not the council members, not the residents, not even the staff assigned to take notes. The room once filled with side chatter and subtle coughs, had gone completely still. Not even the HVAC system seemed to hum. After Mayor Helen Dorsey stepped away from the podium, she didn't return to her seat. She stood just to the side, folder closed, her hands resting one over the other. She made no eye contact with the council members. Just watched the room with the quiet composure of someone who had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. Councilmember Taylor, who had once asked aloud if the veteran was off his meds, cleared his throat. Then he stood. He didn't say anything, didn't look around, just gathered his notebook, slid his chair back with a low screech, and walked out the side door without a word. The echo of the door closing behind him broke the silence for only a moment before it returned like a heavy curtain in the second row. The young reporter from the Gazette, who had smirked during the first town hall, now stared down at his phone. The screen still lit, but he wasn't scrolling. He slowly placed it face down on the armrest beside him, leaned forward slightly, and lowered his eyes. The expression wasn't embarrassment or guilt, it was something closer to being caught off guard by the weight of a truth he hadn't expected to land so heavily. Across the aisle, a veteran with silver pins on his collar nodded once. Another, man mid-50s, who had once worked maintenance on the railway line, crossed his arms and looked toward the window, eyes unfocused. No one whispered, no one nudged a neighbor. No one glanced toward the exit to gauge if it was time to go. It was a room that no longer needed convincing. The council clerk glanced toward the mayor, then toward the empty seat where Taylor had been. Her pen hovered over the notepad, unsure whether to write what had just happened or if it even needed to be recorded. Finally, she lowered it. In the back, someone shifted their coat and stood up. It was an older woman, Elena Marsh, longtime school secretary, known for her careful attendance at nearly every town meeting. She looked at the mayor, opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again. After a pause, she just gave a small, grateful nod, then sat back down. Helen finally stepped away from her place at the side of the podium and moved slowly toward the rear of the hall. She didn't acknowledge the lingering stares or the mixture of questions forming behind every set of eyes. She didn't try to explain further. The words had already done their job. Walter's daughter, seated near the aisle, closed her eyes for a moment. She had prepared herself for another night of dismissal, of watching her father be treated as an inconvenience. But this wasn't that, not this time. For once, the silence in the room wasn't directed at him. It was directed inward into everyone who had chosen not to see what had been in front of them. The microphone remained on at the podium. Its faint hum continued as the only sound in the space, but no one approached it. No one used it. At the far end of the room, an aide leaned in to whisper something to a council member. He raised his hand slightly, palm flat, and shook his head once. Not now, not tonight. Eventually, people began to stand not en masse, not coordinated, just one at a time. Coats were slipped on quietly, chairs pushed in gently. No words were exchanged. They left the hall with the care of people exiting something sacred or fragile. Helen remained until the room was nearly empty. No cameras followed her. No one asked for a statement, and somewhere blocks away, Walter sat on his porch. The letter was still taped back together, the envelope still tucked beside the window. He didn't know what was said that night, but the stillness in the wind felt different. This time, it didn't feel like warning. It felt like recognition. The folder was left on the mayor's desk the next morning. No courier, no signature. Just placed precisely in the center of the blotter, as if it had been waiting for her arrival. Helen Dorsey closed the office door behind her, turned the lock, and lowered the blinds. Then she sat down and opened it. Inside were 3 documents, each marked with clearance codes that hadn't been used in over 2 decades, each stamped with a gray seal that simply read Archival Restricted. The first document was a summary report from March 1983. The second was a list of relocation orders. The third, a memo and signed marked urgent, surveillance contingency. She started with the summary. The language was clinical, detached, but Helen recognized what it was saying beneath the jargon. Environmental exposure window exceeded projected containment radius by 13.4 meters. Subject distress response documented at 0346 hours. Surveillance operation suspended at 04:01 following unauthorized civilian interaction. The test had gone wrong, not just in theory, In practice, the date matched Walter Cray's timeline. The location listed was the wooded boundary near the train yard, exact coordinates, consistent with the numbers he had written down and kept locked in his basement box for over 40 years. The subject reference operative for 1C. Again, Walter. What followed was harder to process. Containment? Breach involved localized acoustic emission of undetermined origin. Civilian exposure includes 4 nanoprivative individuals. Helen reached for the second document. It was a list. Names redacted, but the format was unmistakable relocation orders. For individuals, new names, new addresses, each relocated. Within 60 days of the incident, their original names were missing, but dates of birth remained visible. She read them, then wrote them down on a yellow legal pad beside her. One name stood out, a birth year that matched a woman who'd once owned a bakery 2 streets down. The store had closed suddenly. No explanation, no forwarding address. Helen checked the town registry database. There was no record of her moving, no official record of her at all. After 1983, the third document gave no answers, only confirmation. A typed memo, dated 2 days after the event, stated, "Surveillance review indicates unplanned civilian engagement. Subject initiated silence protocol under Directive 41CD, exposure confirmed. Recommend relocation of exposed parties and suppression of physical documentation. Subject's future inquiries should be attributed to service-related delusion and handled per standard misattribution protocol." No signature, no agency seal. But there it was. Walter hadn't imagined the silence. He had enforced it because he was ordered to. Helen leaned back in her chair, one hand over her mouth, the other still gripping the edge of the file. The weight of it was heavy, not because of what had happened, but because of how long it had been kept in shadow. Walter Cray had never been confused. He had been carrying someone else's lie. She stood up, walked to the window, and opened the blinds. Outside, the sun had begun to rise across the square. The town moved on like it always did. Cars passed, people walked dogs. A delivery van turned the corner near the library. Nothing looked different, but everything was. Back at his home, Walter sat in the same chair by the window. He hadn't slept much. He didn't expect to. He wasn't waiting for an apology, or even for truth to settle in. He just wanted the thing acknowledged. For years, he had been the only one who remembered. Now he wasn't. His daughter came into the room holding 2 mugs of coffee. She said nothing, just handed him one and sat down. On the coffee table between them was the folded napkin his friend had left behind. 4 digits, the access code that had led to all of this. He looked at it once more, then slid it into the pages of an old field notebook. The words in his head were not angry or loud, just clear. He was never supposed to speak, and he had spoken anyway. Now, someone else had read the file, and for the first time, it wasn't just his burden to carry. The envelope was different, thicker than the usual interoffice mail. No return address, no postmark, just a heavy cream exterior with the word urgent in stark, all caps read across the top. It hadn't come through normal channels. It had been slid under the mayor's door early in the morning. Discovered by her assistant before the building opened, Mayor Helen Dorsey didn't open it immediately. She stared at it first. The weight of the previous week hadn't left her. The classified folder, the relocated names, the declassified summary, had been carefully handled, reviewed, logged in her private notes. But this felt different, heavier in tone, even before it was unsealed. She closed her door, turned the blinds, and sat down. Inside was a single letter, folded twice. The seal at the top was faded but familiar. Department of Defense. Underneath it, Office of Strategic Coordination. The paper was partially redacted. Black bars ran across entire lines, leaving only fragments visible. But the parts that weren't blacked out said more than enough. To Mayor Helen Dorsey, Office of the Mayor, redacted subject, unauthorized civilian inquiry into defense, Project OLV-83, Mayor Dorsey. This letter acknowledges receipt of civilian-level disclosures and documentation regarding events related to Operation Dix OLV-83 file, archived under Defense Authorization Protocol 631B. You are hereby informed that 1. This matter falls under Federal Classification Protocols. To continued inquiry or dissemination of materials, related to the event in question may result in administrative action or federal investigation. 3 local governance bodies are advised to cease all public reference to the project, its components, or associated personnel. This is not a denial. It is a directive. Do not proceed further. There was no signature, no contact number, no closing, just a small embossed stamp in the bottom corner, nearly invisible unless the page caught light. At the right angle, Helen set the letter down. Then she looked out the window. It didn't surprise her, not really, but the precision of the wording unsettled her more than any outright threat could have. It had all the calm of bureaucracy and none of the honesty. It didn't call her wrong. It didn't accuse her of wrongdoing. It didn't even hint at criminality. It just said, "Stop." And beneath that single instruction, the implication was clear: someone had noticed. Someone above her. She picked up her pen and flipped open the small brown notebook she'd been keeping since the veteran first spoke. She wrote down 3 words. They didn't deny. That was enough. Downstairs, the town hall buzzed with normality. A clerk filed license forms. A resident waited to contest a property tax. Somewhere, a copier jammed and was met with a soft groan. No one down there knew that. A warning had arrived upstairs. This small town and the mayor, who had read a sentence out loud that wasn't meant to be heard again, Helen folded the letter again, returned it to the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath a stack of unfiled permits. She locked the drawer and slipped the key into her blazer pocket. She didn't call the governor's office. She didn't alert the town council. She didn't issue a retraction. Instead, she walked down the hallway to the back storage room 1, no longer used for much besides old maps and defunct voter guides. Inside, she pulled out a file box and opened a new folder. She labeled it Pentagon Correspondence. The file would stay in that room for now. Later that afternoon, Walter's daughter received a call from a number she didn't recognize. No message, no voicemail, just a missed call. She showed it to her father. He took one look and told her not to answer it if it rang again that night. Lights flickered twice at the edge of the old train yard, but nothing else happened, just wind and quiet. The van parked just past noon, a sleek white vehicle with a satellite dish folded neatly on top and magnetic decals on the sides bearing the logo of one of the largest national networks. 2 producers stepped out, followed by a young reporter, in a fitted blazer and heels that didn't quite suit the uneven sidewalks of the town square. Their presence drew a few curious glances from locals, but no one approached. It wasn't a place used to news crews. Walter had agreed to the interview on one condition: no dramatization, no soft lighting, no music overlay, just facts, they told. Him they understood. That they respected his story. That this would let the country know the truth. They set up in his living room. The fireplace was cleared, the bookshelf dusted, the folded napkin with the 4-digit code had been tucked away in a drawer. His daughter brewed coffee and stayed in the kitchen close enough to hear, but far enough to let him speak on his own. The camera rolled for over an hour. He told them what he remembered. He told them about the night in 1983, about the strange burst of light in the woods, about the screaming, the confusion, the silence that followed, the orders he received to say nothing, the years of trying to file requests for information that always came back with red stamps or no reply. He spoke slowly, clearly. He did not stumble. He did not exaggerate. He just told the truth, the way he'd been waiting to for decades. The reporter asked questions respectfully, but her face revealed that she hadn't expected him to be so measured. No anger, no wild gestures, no trembling voice, just a man who remembered more than people had allowed him to. She asked about the envelope marked "Do Not Open." He said he'd opened it. He didn't say what was inside. She asked about the mayor. He said she had asked the right question, and that, sometimes, that's all it takes. She asked what he wanted people to understand. He paused, then said, that I didn't make it up, that I was there, and that silence doesn't mean you're wrong. They wrapped up just after 2 p.m. The crew packed quickly. The producer shook his hand, said it would air within the week, that they might need a follow-up, that someone from legal would reach out for final approvals, just routine. He nodded politely, but he didn't ask for contact information. He didn't expect a follow-up. The van left town quietly. The satellite dish never even unfolded. 4 days later, the network aired a different segment, a feature about drought conditions in the Midwest. It ran during the same time slot the interview was supposed to air. No mention of Walter, no footage, not even in the extended online cuts. His daughter refreshed the station's website 3 times, then closed her laptop. He didn't ask what she found. She brought him tea and left it on the windowsill beside him that evening. As the sun set behind the tree line, he sat with a notebook on his lap and wrote down the date of the interview. Then he underlined it twice and put a single mark beside it, unaired. He wasn't surprised, he wasn't disappointed either. He had said what needed to be said. Whether or not anyone broadcast it didn't change that it had been spoken in the quiet of the house. The only sound was the occasional turning of a page and the creak of the chair. Beneath him, the truth had always been inconvenient, but he no longer needed permission to tell it. And if no one aired his story, he would still carry it, every word. The box had been there for years. On the highest shelf of the hallway closet, behind a row of winter coats no one wore anymore, and a stack of brittle tax folders marked with years long gone. Walter pulled it down with both hands, brushing off a layer of dust that softened the edges like snow. The cardboard edges were bowed from time, corners dulled, but the tape had held. He didn't rush. He brought it to the dining table, cleared a space, and opened it slowly, folding back each flap like turning the pages of a book he already knew by heart. On top was the uniform, pressed once, folded deliberately, and never disturbed since. The fabric smelled faintly of starch and old cedar. His name patch was still stitched above the right chest pocket. Cray, the stitching was tight. The thread faded at the edges. His hand hovered over it before gently lifting the jacket out and laying it flat across the table. One button had come loose over the years, barely holding on by a fraying thread. He ran his fingers down the crease of the sleeve. The muscle memory of wearing it came back not as pride, but as weight of duty. Yes, but also silence. Beneath the jacket was the flag, folded into the tight triangle that had once sat on his mother's mantle. Not draped at a funeral, not presented with final salutes, just boxed, stored, not displayed. He had never wanted to give people a reason to ask, but tonight he unfolded it carefully. Each corner opened with precision. He laid it flat across the table, smoothing the edges with the side of his hand. The stars pointed upward, aligned, as they had been the last time he saw them stretch across a clear sky while stationed out in the western testing fields. His daughter walked in, saw him standing there, and didn't say a word. She paused in the doorway, leaned lightly against the frame. He didn't look up, just gestured gently for her to come closer. She approached, hands loose at her sides, unsure of what he needed or what she was supposed to say. He pointed to the jacket, then the flag, then said softly, "Do you remember when I told you there were things I never brought home?" She nodded. He added, "I did bring them, I just kept them in boxes." They stood in silence for a moment. He reached over, lifted the flag, and held it not like a display, not like a symbol, but like an old photograph, something familiar, heavy, not with sadness, but with use. He didn't hang it. He didn't put it in the window. He didn't place it in a frame. He just held it. For a long time, when he finally set it down again, it was gently beside the jacket, both resting flat against the wood like two pieces of a story that had always belonged to each other. His daughter looked at him, then stepped into the kitchen and returned with the iron, the one she used for school uniforms when her own children were little. She plugged it in near the table without asking. He didn't stop her. She took the jacket first, pressed the sleeves, the shoulders, the collar. She replaced the loose button with one she found in the sewing drawer. She said nothing. Her face was calm. Then the flag. She moved slowly, each motion respectful, but not ceremonial. This wasn't a performance. This was maintenance care, a quiet restoration of something nearly forgotten, but not discarded. When they were done, she folded the flag again. Not as sharply, not as formally, just enough to hold its shape. And she handed it to him. He took it, held it again, then set it beside his chair by the window. Not for display, just close. The town hall smelled faintly of waxed floors and nervous air. Rows of folding chairs had been set up facing the dais, where a modest banner hung white with navy letters that read, "Recognition of Service and Commitment to Truth." A podium stood. In the center, 2 microphones, 1 camera. A local station, the same that had once cut him off mid-sentence, now sent their junior anchor with a fresh haircut and a folder of scripted questions. Councilmember Taylor sat near the edge of the stage. Shifting uncomfortably in his seat, he'd prepared a short speech, though no one had asked him to. Mayor Helen Dorsey stood quietly near the back, her hands clasped in front of her, not holding anything. No papers, no notes. She wasn't going to speak. A printed resolution rested. On a velvet-draped stand, framed in simple oak, it included phrases like dedicated service, unwavering pursuit of justice, and deep regret for past actions. The council had voted unanimously to issue the statement. It had been carefully worded to avoid direct reference to the classified operation, but hinted enough for the press to call it meaningful. Walter sat in the second row, not the first, wore a clean shirt, pressed slacks, and a weathered jacket that still bore his unit patch. He had trimmed his beard the day before. His daughter sat next to him, her hands folded in her lap, a small notebook tucked into her purse that she never pulled out. The mayor called the meeting to order with a short statement about recognizing courage and correcting errors of the past. There was applause, mild, polite. Then Taylor stepped up, cleared his throat, and read from a sheet of paper. "We gather today to honor not only the service of a veteran, but the integrity of a man who never stopped asking questions, even when met with dismissal. We, the Town Council of Name Withheld, extend our sincerest apology for the way Mr. Cray was treated, and we present this resolution as a formal acknowledgement of that error." He turned and gestured toward the plaque. More applause. Walter stood, walked slowly to the podium, not rushing, not dragging his feet either, just steady. The room quieted. A camera clicked somewhere near the back. He didn't touch the microphone. He didn't unfold a speech. He didn't even glance at the framed resolution. He looked out at the room, then let his gaze settle on the mayor. She met his eyes, held the look, said nothing. He gave a small nod, then turned and walked out. No speech, no acceptance, no rejection. Just a nod. The crowd caught it. The room held its breath as the door closed behind him. Outside, the wind was light and dry. Walter walked past the network van, past the cafe where council members sometimes had lunch, past the bronze statue of the town's founder. He kept going until he reached the far bench on the edge of the square, where his dog had once waited while he argued zoning maps with a clerk who hadn't believed him. He sat the plaque, the words, the formal apologies. They hadn't been for him, not really. They were for the building, for the paper trail, for the headline that would run in the next issue of the town's newsletter. He didn't need a plaque. He needed it to be remembered. Not polished, not rewritten, just remembered. And maybe that had started to happen. He closed his eyes, tilted his head slightly, and let the wind pass over his face. Inside, Councilmember Taylor shuffled his speech into his briefcase and asked someone offhandedly if they thought the camera caught enough of the moment. The mayor said nothing. She walked to the edge of the stage, picked up the framed resolution, and placed it on a chair in the front row. Then she too left the room. The office had been cleared out by mid-morning. The framed photos were gone. The shelves stood empty. Even the small cactus on the windowsill, the one that had leaned toward the light all 4 years of Helen Dorsey's term, had been taken home 2 days prior. She had packed her things slowly, deliberately, not because she was sentimental, but because she believed in leaving a space with care. Someone else would sit at this desk now. Someone new would answer the same phone line. Someone would inherit not just the schedule, but the silences. There was one box left, not the kind with office supplies or leftover campaign materials. This one was smaller, plain, wooden, unlabeled. She placed it in the back corner of the office closet, where the shelf bowed slightly from age. It wouldn't be found accidentally. You had to know it was there. Inside was the medallion. It wasn't ceremonial. It had no inscription, no decorative flourish, just a flat bronze coin, heavy in the palm. Walter had given it to her on a rainy morning after the cameras were gone and the apologies had faded. He hadn't said why, just pressed it into her hand and nodded. Next to it, a folder, inside 36 redacted pages, the same ones that once had sat buried in a digital archive marked fire drill, the ones she printed in her office on a late night after locking the door and disconnecting the Ethernet cable. Most of the content was black bars and unexplained codes, but enough had been left: visible coordinates, dates, Vague mentions of exposure thresholds to piece together the outlines of something, deliberately obscured. She hadn't turned them over when asked. She hadn't destroyed them either. She kept them in this box at the top. She placed a letter. It was handwritten. Neat, small, even lines. Not addressed to anyone by name, because she didn't know who would be sitting in this chair after her. Just to the next one. The letter read, "You won't find this on any index, and you won't be told to look, but it matters." He served. Before we knew the full cost, he was told to forget what we weren't brave enough to confront. And when he finally spoke, we laughed. Not because we knew better, but because we didn't want to know at all. What we owe him is not ceremony, it's protection. You'll be asked about him, quietly, maybe only once. The answer is yes. He's telling the truth. Protect him. He protected us. H.D. She folded the letter once, placed it atop the folder, and closed the box. No lock, no seal. Just the weight of the contents keeping it shut. As she closed the closet door, she paused and rested her hand on the handle for a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned out the office light for the last time. Downstairs, the building was alive with movement. Her successor had already arrived, meeting staff, greeting donors, fielding press inquiries. The usual transition noise. No one asked her to stay for a photo. She didn't want one. She slipped out the side exit, past the loading dock, and walked the 2 blocks to her car alone. From the outside, the mayor's office looked the same as it always had. Bricks unchanged. Seal of the city still polished beside the entryway. But somewhere inside, on a shelf behind a closet door, a quiet box. Waited not for credit, not for legacy, just for the moment it might be needed.